The paradigm word is, for verbs, pa'al. And so we count the peh as the first root position, the ayin as the second, and the lamed as the third. So in the case where a nun is in the first position, we call it a Peh-Nun verb. And here's several examples of Peh-Nun verbs. Nafal, to fall, nagash, to come near or to draw near, natan, to give, and then a little bit unusual, lachak. We count lachak as a Peh-Nun because the lamed acts as though it were a nun. Now here's some examples of these same words, and these are each in the kal, imperfect form. And we can see that just what we would expect, there's a competition for the front of the word between the nun and the subject pronoun, and the subject pronoun always wins. And in this case, the nun assimilates into the middle root letter. So, yipol, he will fall. Yigash, he will draw near. Yitain, he will give. And yikach, he will take. So again, it's probably on the analogy of natan, lakach, these two words that are so similar to give and to take, used so often together, that perhaps that's why the lamed functions just like the nun on the beginning of natan. So this is what we will see when they're together or apart. When they're in the Bible, they'll be yitain, yikach, with the dagesh in the kof in this case being the lamed assimilated. And here is nagad, very common word to tell. And it's a hiphil word, so it appears, I think, always in the hiphil. So yagid, imperfect, he will tell. However, when it's in the vav consecutive imperfect, it apocopates vayaged. So we can still see that it's in the hiphil because of the patak under the prefix pronoun, but it's apocopated, so we don't have the hirik yod holding the other letters apart. So in short, we need to just become familiar with the assimilation of the nun, just as we would in our pronunciation rules, but those same rules apply in the case of the conjugations of the Peh-Nun verbs. Genesis 44:14. Vayavo Yehuda va'echav beta Yosef vayipalu lifanav artza. And the subject here is Judah and his brothers. It's a compound subject, but very often the verb only agrees with the first part of a compound subject. That's the case here with vayavo. And Judah came, or rather, and Judah and his brothers came, here we have the directive hey, to the house of Joseph. And they fell down before him to the ground. Another directive hey. So the verb vayipalu comes from nun, peh, lamed, to fall. In this case, we have a kal, vav consecutive imperfect, 3mp. So while in the first phrase, the compound subject winds up having a 3ms, only agreeing with the first part of the subject, in the second part of this sentence, the verb winds up agreeing with a full compound subject, so it's plural. And as you can see, we can see here the nun has assimilated into the peh, leaving behind a dagesh forte. Genesis 4:19. Vayikach lo lemech shetei nashim. The subject is Lamech or Lemech, And Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The verb vayikach comes from lamed, kof, chet. And this is in the kal. We can see that it's vav consecutive imperfect 3 ms. And of course the subject Lamech is spelled out. Now it's just a little unusual since this is the verb begins with a lamed, first root letter, but it functions like a nun in its assimilation. Again, perhaps on the analogy of to give natan and to take lakach. Perhaps the 2 first root letters function the same. But in any case, we can see the dagesh in the kof, which signifies the assimilation of the lamed. So we treat lakach, a little unusually, as a Peh-Nun verb because the first root letter functions as though it were a nun. Genesis 9:22. Vayar chem avi Canaan, et ervat aviv, vayaged lifnei echav bachutz. The subject is Ham, the father of Canaan. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told to his 2 brothers outside. Vayaged comes from Nun, Gimel, Dalet, to tell. And in this case, we have a Hiphial form, stem, and we can see this because of the patach under the prefix pronoun. That tells us it's a Hiphial. And it's vav, consecutive imperfect, 3 ms. And he told. And so we have the apocryphation again with the, instead of a hirik yod, it is reduced to a tsere, vayaged. So this is very characteristic of the Peh-Nun vav consecutive imperfects. And here we can see the nun assimilated as a dagesh forte into the gimel.